Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The desolate town of Ironclad had always been a forgotten corner of Earth. Tucked away in the shadow of a dormant volcano, it was a place where nothing extraordinary ever happened, until the night the sky turned green. Dr. Alan Reese, a biologist turned recluse, peered through his telescope as strange lights darted across the heavens. At first, he assumed it was just another meteor shower. But when the ground beneath his modest cabin trembled, his heart raced. He rushed outside, the cold air biting at his skin, and stared in awe as a sleek, obsidian spacecraft descended into the nearby forest. By morning, the rumors had spread like wildfire. The entire town buzzed with stories of visitors from another world. Most dismissed it as a prank, but a select few, including Alan, knew the truth. He had seen the craft with his own eyes, and its occupants. That afternoon, a delegation arrived in Ironclad. They were humanoid but unmistakably alien. Tall, lithe, and adorned in shimmering outfits that seemed to shift colors in the sunlight, they introduced themselves as envoys from the planet Zivler. They spoke fluent English, their voices melodic and strangely calming. Their leader, a woman named Sarala, explained their purpose. "We come in peace," Sarala said, her violet eyes scanning the crowd. "We seek mutual cooperation. In exchange for knowledge and technology, we offer our service to humanity." The crowd murmured with a mix of skepticism and awe. To prove their intentions, the Zivlarians demonstrated their abilities. With a mere gesture, Sarala levitated a nearby car, disassembled it midair, and reassembled it flawlessly. The people of Ironclad were sold. The aliens were welcomed with open arms, and true to their word, they integrated seamlessly into human society. Sarala and her team, dubbed the Maids due to their eagerness to serve, quickly gained the trust of the townsfolk. They helped with agriculture, repaired aging infrastructure, and even tutored children. Their advanced technology made life in Ironclad easier than ever. But Alan wasn't convinced. A man of science, he found their arrival too convenient. Why would a race so advanced serve humans with such eagerness? His suspicions grew when Sarala requested a meeting at his cabin. The alien leader arrived alone, her radiant presence filling Alan's modest living room. She surveyed the clutter of books and specimens with a faint smile before addressing him. "Dr. Reese, you're a man of intellect. Surely you've wondered why we're really here." Alan crossed his arms, his gaze unwavering. "It's crossed my mind." Sarala's smile deepened. "We've studied your species for centuries. Humanity is unique, resilient. Your adaptability is unmatched in the galaxy." Alan's stomach tightened. "And? Our species faces extinction," Sarala admitted. "A genetic bottleneck. We require fresh genetic material to survive." Alan's heart pounded. "You're here to breed with us." Sarala nodded, her expression serene. "It's a symbiotic arrangement. Your kind will gain access to unparalleled knowledge and we will secure our future." Alan's mind raced. While the offer sounded beneficial on the surface, the implications were staggering. What would happen to humanity's independence? Was this truly a partnership or a subtle invasion? As Sarala departed, leaving Alan to grapple with the revelation, a chilling thought struck him. The Maids were too perfect, their actions too calculated. Were they genuinely here to save their species, or to conquer his? Alan couldn't sleep that night. Sarala's words replayed in his mind like a broken record. "Your kind will gain access to unparalleled knowledge and we will secure our future." Her calm demeanor belied the gravity of her statement. It wasn't an offer, it was a declaration. The Maids had a plan and humanity was at its center. The next morning, Alan ventured into town. Ironclad was buzzing with activity. The Zivlarians had set up aid centers on the main street, offering advanced medical treatments, energy-efficient technology, and even genetic enhancements for crops. The townsfolk lined up eagerly, their faces glowing with gratitude. For many, the aliens were saviors. Alan's unease grew as he observed Sarala and her team. Their charm and efficiency were almost hypnotic. People laughed at their jokes, followed their instructions without question, and seemed to hang on their every word. Even Sheriff McAllister, a hardened skeptic, was seen chatting amiably with one of the Maids. Desperate for answers, Alan sought out someone he could trust. Dr. Elaine Morris, a retired astrophysicist who had been teaching science at the local high school. Elaine had always been a voice of reason in Ironclad, and Alan hoped she would see through the Maid's polished facade. He found her in her greenhouse, tending to rows of genetically modified tomatoes. As he explained what Sarala had revealed, Elaine's expression darkened. "They're too perfect," Elaine muttered, examining one of her plants. No species is that altruistic. There's always a catch. Alan nodded. That's what I'm afraid of. They're not just integrating, they're infiltrating. Have you noticed how everyone seems entranced by them? Elaine leaned back in her chair, her sharp eyes narrowing. It could be psychological manipulation. Subliminal signals, pheromones, even their voices. They're advanced enough to pull it off. Alan shuddered. If the maids were influencing people on a biological level, resistance would be nearly impossible. We need proof, he said. Something concrete to expose their agenda? Elaine hesitated. The ship, she said finally. They've kept it under heavy guard since their arrival, but if we can access it, we might find the answers we're looking for. Breaking into an alien craft was a daunting proposition, but Alan agreed. They decided to act that night under the cover of darkness. When the sun set, Ironclad fell eerily silent. Most of the townsfolk had gone to bed, their trust in the maids lulling them into a false sense of security. Alan and Elaine crept through the forest, their flashlights cutting through the gloom. The spacecraft loomed ahead, a sleek black silhouette against the starlit sky. Two Xivlarians stood guard, their glowing staffs casting an otherworldly light. Elaine motioned for Alan to follow her. She had fashioned a makeshift EMP device from old electronics, designed to disrupt the guards' equipment. When they were close enough, she activated it. A faint hum filled the air, and the guards staggered, their staffs flickering and dimming. Alan and Elaine slipped past them and into the ship. The interior was a marvel of alien engineering. Smooth walls pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent glow, and the air was filled with a faint hum that seemed to resonate in Alan's chest. They moved quickly, searching for anything that could shed light on the maid's true intentions. In a central chamber they found it, a holographic console displaying detailed biological data. Alan's stomach turned as he recognized human DNA sequences interwoven with Xivlarian genomes. Beside the console were rows of glass cylinders containing what appeared to be embryos, hybrids. They've already started, Elaine whispered, her voice trembling. Alan felt a surge of anger. The maids weren't just planning, they were executing their plan under the guise of cooperation. Humanity wasn't an ally, it was a resource. Before they could gather more evidence, the chamber filled with a sudden, blinding light. Sarala's voice echoed, calm but unyielding. Dr. Reese, Dr. Morris. I expected better from you. Alan turned to see Sarala standing in the doorway, flanked by two guards. Her expression was one of disappointment rather than anger. You misunderstand our intentions. This is not conquest, it is survival. Elaine stepped forward, defiant. At the expense of our autonomy? You're not saving your species, you're assimilating ours. Sarala's gaze softened, almost pitying. We chose this method to avoid conflict. Your kind values peace, do you not? Peace built on lies is no peace at all, Alan snapped. Sarala sighed. You're brave, Dr. Reese. But bravery will not change the reality of our situation. You have a choice, join us willingly or be left behind. The guards advanced, their glowing staffs raised. Alan and Elaine had no weapons, no backup. But as panic threatened to overtake him, Alan's mind raced. The EMP device was still in Elaine's pocket. Now, he shouted. Elaine activated the device again, sending a shockwave through the room. Sarala and her guards staggered, momentarily disoriented. Alan seized the opportunity, grabbing one of the glowing cylinders as evidence, and they bolted for the exit. They returned to Ironclad, breathless and shaken. In Elaine's lab they examined the cylinder. Inside was an embryo, a grotesque fusion of human and alien features. It was undeniable proof of the maid's intentions. We need to show this to the world, Elaine said, her voice firm. If people see what they're really doing, they'll fight back. Alan nodded, but his thoughts were clouded with dread. The maids weren't just an isolated threat. They represented a methodical, calculated invasion. Humanity had faced wars and disasters before, but this was different. The enemy wasn't just at the gates, they were already inside. As dawn broke over Ironclad, Alan knew one thing for certain. The fight for humanity's future was only beginning. The morning light cast long shadows over Ironclad, but for Alan and Elaine, there was no time for rest. They had uncovered the maid's dark secret, but exposing it would be a challenge. The town had fallen under the alien spell, their advances and charm clouding the judgment of even the most skeptical residents. Convincing them of the truth would take more than words, it would take undeniable evidence. Alan paced Elaine's lab, the glowing cylinder clenched in his hands. This is it, he said, his voice low. This is the proof we need to wake people up. Elaine nodded, though her expression was grim. The problem is distribution. The maids control the town. Even if we convince a few, they'll suppress the truth before it spreads. Alan slammed his fist against the table, frustration boiling over. We can't let them win. There has to be a way to reach the outside world. Elaine hesitated. The old radio tower, she said finally. It hasn't been used in years, but if we can get it working, we could broadcast the evidence to nearby cities. The maids won't be able to stop it once it's out there. Alan's eyes lit up. Then we'd better move fast. The radio tower stood on the outskirts of Ironclad, a rusted relic of a bygone era. Once used for emergency broadcasts, it had fallen into disrepair when the town's population dwindled. Now, it loomed like a forgotten sentinel, its jagged silhouette piercing the cloudy sky. Getting there wasn't easy. The maids had increased their patrols, their glowing staffs slicing through the darkness as they scanned for any signs of dissent. Alan and Elaine navigated the back roads, avoiding the main streets and sticking to the shadows. By the time they reached the tower, the sun was dipping below the horizon. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust. The equipment was ancient, a tangle of wires and dials that looked like something out of a history book. Elaine got to work, her fingers flying over the controls as she tested the connections. This is going to take some time, she said, her voice strained. Keep an eye out for company. Alan nodded, standing guard at the doorway. His mind raced as he watched the town below, its streets glowing with the maids' otherworldly light. They were efficient, calculated, and unrelenting. If the broadcast failed, humanity's chances of resistance would dwindle to nothing. A sudden noise jolted him from his thoughts. Footsteps echoed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Alan's heart pounded as he turned to Elaine. We've got company. Elaine cursed under her breath, her hands trembling as she adjusted the last dial. Stall them. I just need a few more minutes. Alan grabbed a rusted crowbar from the corner of the room and stepped outside. The maids were closing in, their figures silhouetted against the fading light. Sarala was at the forefront, her violet eyes glowing with determination. Dr. Reese, she called, her voice as smooth as silk. You've caused quite a stir. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Alan tightened his grip on the crowbar. You're not fooling me, Sarala. I know what you're doing and I won't let you get away with it. Sarala's expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of something darker in her eyes, annoyance perhaps. Humanity's survival depends on cooperation. This defiance is disappointing. Alan took a step forward, his chest heaving. Humanity's survival doesn't depend on being turned into your lab rats. Sarala raised a hand, signaling her guards to hold back. Dr. Reese, your passion is admirable, but your resistance is futile. Join us willingly, and you can shape the future of both our species. Alan glanced over his shoulder, silently praying Elaine had finished. He needed more time. You talk about cooperation, but everything you've done is manipulation. You don't want partners, you want pawns? Sarala's calm facade cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her voice took on a steely edge. We have given you everything. Technology, prosperity, knowledge. And still you resist. Why? Because freedom is worth more than anything you could offer, Alan shot back. Before Sarala could respond, the radio tower crackled to life. Elaine's voice echoed through the loudspeakers, carrying urgency and resolve. This is Dr. Elaine Morris, broadcasting from Ironclad. The truth about the Zivlarians must be known. A burst of static followed, then a recording of Sarala's earlier confession. We require fresh genetic material to survive. The sound of Elaine and Alan's discovery played next, followed by detailed descriptions of the hybrid embryos. Every word was damning. The maids froze, their attention snapping to the tower. Sarala's composure shattered. Shut it down, she barked, her melodic voice now laced with fury. Alan swung the crowbar at the nearest guard, catching them off guard and buying Elaine precious seconds. She emerged from the tower's entrance, clutching the glowing cylinder as she ran toward him. It's done, she gasped. The broadcast is out. They can't stop it now. The maids regrouped, their glowing staffs crackling with energy. Sarala stepped forward, her gaze locking onto Elaine. You've doomed yourselves. This will not end well for you. Elaine smirked, holding up the cylinder. And you've underestimated humanity. We're not so easy to control. Alan and Elaine bolted into the forest, the maids' shouts echoing behind them. Adrenaline coursed through their veins as they weaved through the trees, the cylinder glowing like a beacon in Elaine's hands. They had taken the first step in exposing the maids' true intentions, but they knew the battle was far from over. By the time they reached Alan's cabin, they were exhausted but exhilarated. The broadcast had been a gamble, but it was a gamble that had paid off. News outlets in nearby cities would pick up the signal, and the world would soon know the truth. As they caught their breath, Elaine turned to Alan, her expression determined. "This is just the beginning. The maids won't give up, and neither can we." Alan nodded, his jaw set. "If they want a fight, we'll give them one." In the distance, the lights of Ironclad flickered ominously, a reminder of the maids' presence. Alan knew the road ahead would be treacherous, but for the first time since the maids' arrival, he felt a glimmer of hope. Humanity had been underestimated, and that was the aliens' biggest mistake. Alan and Elaine's broadcast rippled through the region faster than they had anticipated. By the next morning, Ironclad was a town on edge. The maids' facade of benevolence cracked under the weight of suspicion. Whispers spread among the townsfolk, hushed but persistent. Questions arose where there had once been blind trust. Why were the maids here? What did they really want? For Alan and Elaine, the shift in the town's mood was a small victory, but they knew it wasn't enough. Sarala and her team would not back down without a fight, and the resistance would need more than whispers to stand a chance. The call to action. Alan spent the morning in his cabin, poring over the maids' stolen data. The glowing cylinder sat on the table, a grim reminder of the stakes. Elaine joined him, her face drawn from exhaustion but her resolve unwavering. "We need allies," Elaine said, breaking the silence. "The broadcast might have sown doubt, but doubt isn't enough. We need people willing to fight back." Alan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "The problem is convincing them. The maids have embedded themselves into the fabric of this town. Even with the evidence, some people might still side with them out of fear, or greed." Elaine nodded grimly. "Then we focus on the ones we know will listen. Sheriff McAllister, for one. He's not the type to trust easily, even if he's been cordial with the maids." Alan frowned. "McAllister? He's practical to a fault. If he thinks siding with the maids is easier, he'll stay out of it." Elaine smirked. "Then we give him a reason not to stay out of it?" A risky meeting. Sheriff McAllister's office was an unassuming building on the edge of town, its faded sign creaking in the wind. Alan and Elaine approached cautiously, their every step weighed down by the risk. If McAllister had already fallen under the maid's influence, this meeting could end disastrously. Inside, McAllister sat at his desk, sipping coffee from a chipped mug. His piercing gaze locked onto them as they entered. "Dr. Reese. Dr. Morris. I was wondering when you'd show up." Alan exchanged a wary glance with Elaine. "You've heard the broadcast, then?" McAllister leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "I have. And I've heard a lot of talk around town since. People are scared, confused. Some are even angry. I don't like chaos in my town." Elaine stepped forward, her voice steady. "Then help us bring order. The maids aren't what they seem, Sheriff. We've uncovered their real purpose here, and it's not to help us, it's to assimilate us." McAllister raised an eyebrow. "Assimilate? You're saying these aliens who've been fixing roads and treating injuries are planning to, what? Take over the world?" "Not the world," Alan said, his voice low. "Just humanity. They want our genetics to save their species, but they'll do it at the cost of ours." McAllister studied them for a long moment, his face unreadable. Finally he sighed. "I've seen enough strange things since they got here to believe you might be onto something. But belief isn't enough. If I'm going to stick my neck out, I need something concrete." Elaine placed the glowing cylinder on his desk. "This is concrete. Hybrid embryos, human and alien DNA combined. This is what they've been working on while pretending to help us." The sheriff stared at the cylinder, his expression darkening. He reached for his radio but hesitated. "If I side with you, it's war. You realize that?" Alan nodded. "We're not asking you to fight alone. We're asking you to lead. People trust you, McAllister. If you stand with us, others will follow." After a tense pause, McAllister stood. "Fine. But if we're doing this, we do it right. I'll call a town meeting tonight. You'd better be ready to make your case. The showdown begins." As night fell, the townsfolk gathered in the square, their faces lit by the maids' bioluminescent streetlights. Sarala and her team stood at the edge of the crowd, their serene expressions betraying no hint of concern. Alan and Elaine took the stage, flanked by McAllister and a handful of his deputies. Alan stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "My friends, I know you've welcomed the maids into our town. I know you've seen their kindness, their technology, their promises. But what you haven't seen is their true purpose." He held up the glowing cylinder, the embryo inside casting an eerie light. Gasps rippled through the crowd. This is what they've been hiding. Hybrids, genetic experiments designed to combine their DNA with ours. They're not here to help us. They're here to use us. Sarala stepped forward, her melodic voice cutting through the murmurs. Dr. Reese, you twist the truth to suit your narrative. These hybrids are a symbol of unity, a bridge between our species. We seek only to ensure mutual survival. Alan turned to the crowd, his voice rising. Is that what you want? To become experiments? To lose what makes us human? The crowd erupted in shouts and arguments, the tension palpable. McAllister raised his hands, calling for order. Everyone calm down. You've heard both sides. Now it's time to decide. The maids began to retreat toward their ship, their serene composure cracking as more voices turned against them. Sarala's gaze locked onto Alan, her calm veneer giving way to cold determination. You've made a grave mistake, Dr. Reese. Humanity will regret this. A line in the sand. The meeting ended in chaos, but the seeds of rebellion had been sown. Some townsfolk sided with Alan, their fear of the maids outweighing their gratitude. Others remained loyal to the aliens, swayed by their promises of prosperity. The division was stark, but it was a start. Alan and Elaine returned to the cabin, their minds racing with plans. They had exposed the maids' agenda, but Sarala's parting words lingered like a shadow over their victory. They won't leave quietly, Elaine said, her voice heavy. We need to prepare for whatever comes next. Alan nodded, his jaw set. This isn't just about Ironclad anymore. It's about humanity. If the maids want a fight, we'll give them one. As the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Alan knew the battle for Ironclad, and the future of humanity, was only just beginning. The days following the town meeting were tense. The line between supporters and skeptics of the maids had hardened, and Ironclad was a town divided. Some of the townsfolk rallied behind Alan and Elaine, calling for action and preparation for the inevitable confrontation. Others, influenced by the maids' technological marvels and the aliens' promises of prosperity, still clung to the belief that the extraterrestrials were benevolent beings seeking only to help humanity survive. In the wake of the meeting, the maids had become more cautious, retreating into their compounds and reducing their public appearances. But Alan and Elaine knew it was only a matter of time before they made their move. The tension in the air was palpable, like the moment before a storm. The enemy moves. It was late one night when Alan first heard the sound of heavy footsteps outside his cabin. The wind was still, and there was an unsettling quiet in the air. His pulse quickened as he moved to the window, his heart pounding in his chest. In the dim light of the moon, he saw a group of maids, led by Sarala, approaching the cabin. Their figures were lit by the faint glow of their bioluminescent skin, their eyes locked onto his cabin with a predatory focus. Alan moved quickly, grabbing a rifle from the wall and slipping out the back door. He needed to warn the others. As he ran through the woods, his mind raced with possibilities. What were they doing here? Had they come to silence him and Elaine? Or was this their first step in something bigger? He had no answers, only the cold certainty that they couldn't afford to wait any longer. A town in flux. Back in town, Elaine had been busy organizing the scattered resistance. McAllister's office had become their unofficial command center, and deputies loyal to the cause had begun to gather, though the group was still small. The sheriff's role had been pivotal, but even he had his reservations. The maid's presence in the town was undeniable, and those who still sided with the aliens were vocal in their protests. Elaine paced the floor of McAllister's office, looking over maps of Ironclad and the surrounding areas. The maids had built structures at strategic points, their ships and technology scattered in the vicinity. If they were planning something, it wouldn't be subtle. Her thoughts were interrupted by the crackle of her radio. It was Alan, his voice tense. Elaine, they're coming. Sarala and a group of maids are headed toward my cabin. We need to mobilize the resistance now. Elaine's stomach churned with fear. Understood. Get to the radio tower. I'll rally the others. Mobilizing the resistance. The resistance, though small, had gained a degree of unity in the days since the broadcast. McAllister's standing in the town, though divided, had been enough to keep the maids from taking full control. There were those who still believed in the aliens' promises, but there were also those who feared the true extent of the maids' intentions. Elaine quickly organized the townspeople into small groups, handing out weapons and giving instructions for the defense of the town. Word spread quickly, and soon, a small but determined militia gathered at McAllister's office, awaiting Alan's return. The maids had underestimated humanity's resilience, and now the town was about to show them just how wrong they were. The first clash. By the time Alan arrived at the radio tower, the Maids had already begun to move in force. Sarala had positioned her soldiers near the outskirts of town, keeping a tight perimeter around Ironclad's most vulnerable areas. They had clearly decided to make their move. Elaine met Alan just outside the tower, her face grim but resolute. "We need to act quickly," she said, her eyes scanning the surroundings. "We can't afford to let them get any closer." Alan nodded. "We'll make a stand here. If we can hold the radio tower, we can use it to coordinate with other towns." McAllister's group had already fortified the tower, using a mix of old weapons and newly scavenged supplies. The resistance was small, but it was determined. Alan could see the fire in their eyes, the same fire that had sparked their rebellion. A shout from the edge of the woods signaled the beginning of the Maids' advance. The first of their soldiers appeared, their glowing staffs illuminating the darkness. Sarala's voice echoed through the woods, calm but commanding. "Dr. Reese," she called. "You've chosen the path of conflict. We will not allow you to stop the future." Alan's grip tightened on his rifle. "The future you're offering isn't one we're willing to accept." With a sharp motion, Sarala signaled her troops to advance. The resistance opened fire, the sharp crack of gunshots cutting through the night air. The Maids moved with speed and precision, their glowing staffs raising energy shields that deflected most of the gunfire. But the townsfolk were not without their own advantages. Despite the Maids' technological superiority, the humans had something the aliens did not experience. They fought with desperation, with the instinct to survive. The Maids' initial advance faltered as their troops were pinned down by a barrage of fire. For a moment, it seemed the Maids might retreat, but Sarala raised her hand, signaling for her soldiers to regroup. "This resistance is futile. Surrender now and we will show mercy." "We won't surrender," Elaine shouted back. "Not when the cost is our future." The battle raged on as the resistance fought valiantly to hold their ground. Alan fired into the night, aiming for the glowing figures of the Maids as they moved through the forest, their shields flickering and shifting with each blast. Betrayal from within. The tide began to turn when an unexpected betrayal came from within the ranks of the resistance. A familiar face, one of McAllister's deputies, lowered his weapon and raised a white flag, signaling for a ceasefire. Alan's blood ran cold as he recognized the deputy. Ethan, a trusted ally, had turned. "Ethan, what are you doing?" Alan shouted. Ethan's eyes flickered nervously between Alan and the Maids. "They offered me a way out. They promised safety, security for my family. I couldn't keep fighting like this, Alan. I didn't want to see any more bloodshed." "Your family is in danger because of them," Alan yelled, but Ethan didn't move. "You're a traitor. You're handing us over." For a long moment Ethan hesitated. Then, with a single regretful glance, he lowered the flag. "I'm sorry. I never wanted this." The betrayal cut deep, but Alan knew they couldn't afford to falter. The Maids would not show mercy, and neither would their collaborators. The turning point. Just as the situation seemed bleak, a distant rumble echoed across the battlefield. The radio tower's speakers crackled to life as the voice of a neighboring town's mayor came through. "Ironclad, this is Blue Ridge. We've received your distress signal. Reinforcements are on the way." A cheer went up among the resistance as the reinforcements, armed and determined, poured into the fray. The Maids' lines began to fracture as more townspeople joined the fight. It wasn't over yet, but the balance had shifted. The Maids' dominance was being challenged. A new hope. As the battle raged, Alan and Elaine exchanged a look of determination. They had taken the first step, now they had to finish what they started. The resistance had proven they could stand up to the Maids, and with Blue Ridge's reinforcements, they now had the momentum. But even as hope surged within him, Alan knew the Maids weren't about to retreat quietly. This was just the beginning. And no matter the cost, he and Elaine would see it through to the end. The first light of dawn broke over Ironclad, casting a faint glow across the battlefield. The Maids' assault had been halted, but the night had been long and the war was far from over. The town had taken its first major step toward resistance, but Alan and Elaine knew that the Maids wouldn't back down easily. Sarala and her forces had retreated for the moment, but their retreat was tactical, not a surrender. The arrival of Blue Ridge's reinforcements had given the humans a brief respite, but the Maids were regrouping, preparing for the next phase of their operation. The resistance had gained a foothold, but they needed to strike back quickly. The Maids wouldn't give them much time. Planning the next move. At McAllister's office, the makeshift command center was buzzing with activity. The maps on the walls were cluttered with notes and red marks, tracking the Maids' movements. The resistance had won the night, but they couldn't afford to rest on their laurels. Alan and Elaine stood over the table, surrounded by McAllister and the few trusted deputies who had joined their cause. Sheriff McAllister, though loyal to their mission, had become increasingly worried. The Maids had already demonstrated their superiority in technology, and with each passing hour, they were adapting to human tactics. "We can't let them regroup," McAllister said, his voice low. "If we wait too long, we'll lose the momentum we've built." Alan nodded in agreement. "We have to hit them while they're disorganized. They're still reeling from the surprise, but it won't last. They'll consolidate their forces and come back stronger. Our best chance is to strike fast and disrupt their command." Elaine, her face grim but resolute, pointed to a location on the map. "There. The Maids' main base of operations is there, just outside the town. If we take that out, we can cripple their communication and coordination. But we'll need everything we've got to pull it off." McAllister grunted, his hands resting on the map. "It's risky. They'll have all their forces there, Sarala included. We won't get a second chance if we fail." Alan's eyes burned with determination. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for a perfect plan. We hit them hard and fast. If we can break their command structure, the rest will follow." Elaine turned to McAllister. "We'll need full cooperation from the town. If we're going to make this work, we need everyone on board." McAllister met her gaze and nodded. "I'll get the word out. If there's one thing I know, it's that the people of this town are stubborn. They'll fight for what's right." The assault begins. The resistance didn't waste any time. Within hours, small groups of civilians and resistance fighters had gathered in various strategic locations. Alan, Elaine, and McAllister's team would lead the charge on the Maids' compound, while Blue Ridge's reinforcements set up a perimeter to cut off any potential reinforcements the Maids might send from their ships. Alan's heart pounded as they moved out, the weight of the mission heavy on his shoulders. He couldn't help but think about the risks, about the lives at stake. The Maids had shown their ruthlessness. If they were going to win, it had to be now. The Maids' compound was nestled in the outskirts of Ironclad, just beyond the forest that surrounded the town. The area was heavily fortified, with advanced technology guarding every entrance. The glow of their alien lights made the compound visible from miles away, a constant reminder of their presence. Alan's hand tightened around his rifle as they approached the perimeter. "Ready?" Elaine asked, her voice steady despite the tension. She had always been the calm in the storm, and now, more than ever, Alan appreciated her resolve. "As ready as we'll ever be," Alan replied, his voice tight. The resistance fighters moved quickly, staying low and using the cover of darkness to their advantage. The compound loomed ahead, its advanced technology gleaming ominously in the faint light. But the human determination was unwavering. They breached the first perimeter with relative ease. The Maids had anticipated an attack, but they were still caught off guard by the resistance's speed. However, the real challenge awaited them at the heart of the compound, their command center. The heart of the enemy. Sarala was there, her cool composure ever present despite the chaos unfolding around her. Alan and Elaine had hoped for this moment, for an opportunity to confront her directly. They couldn't afford to waste time on anything less. They pushed forward, reaching the command center's exterior. The sounds of combat echoed in the distance as the resistance and the Maids clashed, their weapons lighting up the night. But Alan's focus was singular: Sarala. If they could capture or eliminate her, the Maids' forces would collapse. "Stay close," Alan ordered, his voice sharp. "We can't afford to get separated." Elaine, her hand steady on the rifle at her side, nodded. "We do this together." As they neared the command center, a few Maids appeared, their glowing staffs raised in warning. But the resistance fighters were quick to neutralize them, advancing with precision. The Maids' advanced shields were formidable, but the humans had adapted. Using makeshift EMP devices, they disabled some of the Maids' tech, rendering the shields useless. Then, through the chaos, they saw her, Sarala, standing at the heart of the command center. Her eyes were a deep violet, glowing with an unnatural intensity. She seemed unfazed by the battle around her, as if the world were beneath her notice. "You're persistent, Dr. Reese," Sarala said, her voice smooth and cold. "But you're out of your depth. This will end in your failure just like the rest of your kind." Alan's grip on his rifle tightened. "Your plan is over, Sarala. It's time for you to face the truth. Humanity isn't your experiment. We'll fight for our freedom." Elaine stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as she met Sarala's gaze. "We've been fighting since the moment you arrived. And we'll keep fighting until you're gone." Sarala raised an eyebrow. "You believe you can win? How quaint." Before she could respond further, the resistance fighters closed in, their weapons trained on the alien leader. But Sarala didn't flinch. Instead, she raised her hand, her eyes flashing with a fierce intensity. "You may win today," Sarala said, her voice filled with an eerie calm. "But this is only the beginning. The Zivlarians will not let this insurrection go unpunished." A strange energy surged through the air, and the Maids' technology began to glow with an even greater intensity. Alan's heart raced. Something was happening. Something he wasn't prepared for. "Get down," he shouted, grabbing Elaine and pulling her to the ground just as a shockwave of energy rippled through the compound. The calm before the storm. The explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending shockwaves through the air. The lights flickered and went out, leaving the compound in darkness. Alan and Elaine scrambled to their feet, disoriented but alive. The Maids were regrouping, their force undeterred by the setback. And now, more than ever, Alan understood the gravity of the situation. This fight was far from over. The Maids would not give up without a final, devastating blow. And with Sarala's ominous words lingering in the air, Alan knew that the true battle for humanity's survival had only just begun. The shockwave from the explosion had left the battlefield in a chaotic mess of flickering lights and disarray. Alan and Elaine both, stunned but unharmed, scrambled to regain their bearings. The air was thick with the smell of scorched earth, and the resistance fighters around them moved cautiously, checking their weapons and looking for their comrades amidst the confusion. "Is everyone all right?" Alan shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. A few fighters nodded, while others were tending to their injured. The battle wasn't over, but for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. Sarala's voice, eerily calm, echoed across the compound. "You think this is a victory? This is merely a delay. Your resistance is futile." Alan's pulse quickened as he and Elaine picked their way through the wreckage, heading toward the source of Sarala's voice. The Maids had been thrown off momentarily, but their resilience was like nothing Alan had ever faced. They were not just invaders. They were a force of nature, poised to remake humanity in their image. "Keep moving," Alan urged Elaine, his eyes scanning the area. "We need to finish this. We can't let them regroup." Elaine nodded, her expression hardened with determination. "We're not backing down. Not now." They reached the heart of the compound, where Sarala stood, surrounded by a handful of elite Maid soldiers. Her eyes burned with a malevolent glow, her calm demeanor in stark contrast to the battle raging around her. She was a figure of cold authority, and in that moment, Alan understood that the Maids were not just invaders, they were conquerors. If they succeeded, humanity would be nothing more than a memory. "You're still here," Sarala said, almost as if she were surprised. "You really think you can stop us? That the fate of your species will change because of this pathetic resistance?" Alan stepped forward, his rifle aimed squarely at her chest. "It's not over yet. As long as we're standing, you haven't won." Sarala's lips curled into a faint smile. "Very well. I'll give you credit for your persistence, Dr. Reese. But this will be your last stand." The Maids around her raised their weapons, energy crackling in the air. Alan's heart pounded in his chest. He knew this was it, the final confrontation. But then, something unexpected happened. Reinforcements arrived. From the depths of the forest came the unmistakable sound of vehicles, Humvees and trucks, their engines roaring in the distance. The humans weren't alone. Blue Ridge, along with several other nearby towns, had arrived with reinforcements. They had rallied behind Alan and Elaine's cause, joining the fight in a desperate bid to save humanity. "Hold your ground." McAllister's voice rang out through the chaos as he led a convoy of soldiers into the compound, their weapons trained on the Maids. "We're not letting these aliens take over." The sight of the reinforcements was like a wave of new energy, and the resistance fighters, emboldened by the arrival of backup, redoubled their efforts. The Maids' elite soldiers hesitated for a moment, unsure how to respond to the unexpected reinforcements. But Sarala was unfazed. She raised her hand, and the Maids' shields flickered to life, shimmering like a force field around them. "Pathetic," she murmured, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your reinforcements are too little, too late." Alan didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his rifle raised, and opened fire on the Maids. Elaine was right behind him, her own weapon flashing as she took aim. The newly arrived forces laid down a barrage of gunfire, but the Maids' shields absorbed most of it. Alan and Elaine exchanged a brief glance. It was clear that conventional weapons weren't going to cut it against their alien technology. They needed something else. Turning the tide. The battle became a desperate struggle of wills. The Maids' advanced technology gave them an undeniable edge, But the Resistance's sheer will to survive kept them fighting, even when hope seemed slim. Alan's mind raced as he scanned the battlefield. Then he saw it, the control tower. It was the Maids' primary communication and command center. If they could disable it, they could cripple the Maids' coordination and give the humans a fighting chance. Elaine, the tower? Alan shouted, pointing toward the structure. If we take it out, we can disrupt their command. That'll buy us time. Elaine nodded, her expression hardening. Let's do it. Together, they broke from cover, weaving through the ongoing firefight. The Maids' attention shifted briefly, their focus drawn to the new threat. But they were quick to adapt, launching energy blasts toward the advancing humans. The humans fought fiercely, determined to protect Alan and Elaine as they made their way toward the tower. The Maids, however, weren't so easily defeated. They retaliated with relentless precision, their energy weapons cutting down any human who strayed too far from cover. But Alan and Elaine weren't backing down. They reached the base of the tower, and Alan immediately set to work, rigging the explosives he had brought with him. Elaine kept watch, her rifle aimed at the Maids advancing toward them. I need a few more minutes, Alan called, his fingers flying over the device. The seconds felt like hours as the sound of distant gunfire and the crackling of energy weapons filled the air. Make it fast. Elaine yelled, her voice filled with urgency. Suddenly, Sarala's voice echoed through the compound, cold and mocking. Do you really think this will stop us, Dr. Reese? You're out of time. Alan's heart pounded as he finished the setup and pressed the detonator. The explosives triggered with a deafening explosion, sending a shockwave through the compound. The control tower erupted in a cloud of debris, and the Maids' communication network went dark. The sudden loss of their command structure threw the Maids into disarray. Their shields faltered and their coordination was disrupted. The humans, fueled by the tide of victory, pressed forward with renewed determination. The final confrontation. Sarala, her eyes filled with fury, stepped forward. You think you've won? You are nothing compared to the Zivlarians. We will return. We will conquer this world. Alan stepped forward, his rifle aimed directly at her. This is humanity's world. You have no place here. In that moment, it felt as if the world held its breath. The Maids were powerful, but Alan and Elaine had proven that humanity's will was even stronger. The battle was far from over, but the Maids' hold on Ironclad was slipping. With the control tower destroyed and their communication network shattered, they were vulnerable. And as Sarala's words echoed through the smoke-filled air, Alan knew one thing for certain. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. Victory for now. The Maids had been defeated, at least for the moment. The battle was won, but Alan and Elaine both knew that this was only the beginning. The Zivlarians would not give up so easily and there was much left to do. Ironclad had survived, but the price of survival was steep. As the dust settled and the Resistance fighters regrouped, Alan turned to Elaine, his face worn but resolute. This isn't over. Elaine nodded, her eyes scanning the horizon. No. But today humanity took a stand. And we'll keep standing until the Maids know they can't take our world. The war for humanity's future had begun, and Alan and Elaine would lead the charge no matter the cost. The first light of dawn began to creep over Ironclad, casting a soft golden glow over the battered town. The battle had been won. But the cost had been high. The streets were littered with the remnants of the conflict, abandoned weapons, scattered debris, and the echoes of a fight that had changed everything. But amidst the ruin there was something else, a quiet, burning sense of hope. Alan and Elaine stood at the edge of the town, looking out at the horizon. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke, but also with something new, the promise of freedom. The Maids had been defeated, but the Zivlarians, their mysterious overlords, were still out there. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. How long do you think we have? Elaine asked, her voice low but steady. She had always been pragmatic, and after everything they had just gone through, her questions were more about survival than celebration. Alan exhaled, watching the wind rustle through the trees. I don't know. We've crippled their command structure, but Sarala wasn't bluffing when she said the Zivlarians would return. They'll regroup and we'll have to be ready. But, for now we've got a moment. We've given humanity a chance. Elaine turned to face him, her eyes fierce. That's all we need. A chance. They had fought, bled, and lost so much in the last few days. Yet, standing there amidst the wreckage, they were the last ones left to carry the torch. It was up to them to rebuild, to prepare for whatever the Maids and their mysterious overlords would throw at them next. But they had done something incredible. They had proven that humanity wasn't going to go down without a fight. That, in itself, was a victory. The aftermath. The town of Ironclad had changed in more ways than one. The Maids' presence had left a permanent scar on the land, but it had also brought out the best in the people who had survived. Sheriff McAllister, despite his gruff exterior, had stepped up as a leader in the aftermath. He was rallying the townspeople, organizing relief efforts, and ensuring that Ironclad could rebuild both physically and emotionally. The resistance fighters, though few in number, had proven themselves to be invaluable. They had fought side by side with the civilians, showing the Maids that humanity's resolve couldn't be crushed so easily. The people of Ironclad weren't soldiers by trade, but they were warriors when it mattered most. And now they were preparing for the next phase of the war. Alan had been surprised by the support from the neighboring towns. When word had spread of Ironclad's stand against the Maids, nearby communities had sent reinforcements, supplies, and support. The message was clear: the Maids weren't just invading a small town. They were challenging the very soul of humanity. And humanity wasn't going to bend. But even in the wake of victory, the quiet weight of the unknown loomed over them. The Zivlarians, whoever they were, hadn't shown themselves in force yet. The Maids, though formidable, were just the beginning. And Alan and Elaine knew that this fragile peace was only temporary. The Zivlarian threat. Back in their makeshift command center, what was once the local library, now a hub for strategy, Alan, Elaine, and McAllister reviewed the data they had gathered on the Maids. It wasn't much, but it was a start. There was still so much they didn't understand about their alien adversaries, but they had learned enough to know that the Maids were only one part of a much larger, more terrifying picture. "We've got some intel from the Maids' communication systems," Alan said, pointing to a set of coordinates on the map. "It's not much, but there's a cluster of signals coming from here just beyond the atmosphere. It could be a Zivlarian fleet or it could be another group of Maids. Either way, it's bad news." McAllister frowned, his grizzled face drawn with worry. "And if it's the Zivlarians? Then we're looking at a whole new level of danger," Alan replied. "From what we've learned about the Maids, the Zivlarians are far more advanced. We're talking about an alien species with technologies that could wipe us out in an instant. The Maids are their pawns." Elaine stepped forward, her brow furrowed. "Do you think they'll come here to Ironclad?" "I don't know," Alan admitted. "They might send more Maids first to gauge our defenses. But the Zivlarians don't strike me as the type to wait around. If they are as powerful as we think, they'll come for us sooner or later." The silence that followed was heavy. The gravity of the situation weighed on them all, but they couldn't afford to dwell on fear. The fight was far from over. "We'll be ready," Elaine said, her voice unwavering. "We've proven that humans can fight back. Now it's time to prepare for the next battle." Preparing for war. Over the following weeks, the townspeople of Ironclad, aided by the reinforcements from Blue Ridge and beyond, turned their attention to preparing for the war that loomed on the horizon. They scavenged for materials, repurposed old weapons, and reinforced the town's defenses. It was an exhausting and overwhelming task, but they had no choice. Every day that passed brought them closer to the inevitable return of the Maids, or worse, the arrival of the Zivlarians. Alan and Elaine spent their days coordinating with the growing resistance, training civilians to defend themselves and organizing strategies for potential attacks. The people of Ironclad had gone from innocent bystanders to battle-hardened warriors. They had learned the brutal cost of peace, and they weren't going to let it slip away again. One evening, as they stood atop a hill overlooking the town, Alan turned to Elaine, his expression grim but resolute. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Elaine looked out over the horizon, where the last remnants of the Maids' ships still hovered like ghosts, their glowing lights a reminder of the battle they had won and the one still to come. "Yeah. But we've got one thing they don't: determination. We'll keep fighting, Alan. We'll keep fighting until humanity's free." Alan smiled, albeit tiredly. "For now, we've earned a moment of peace. But after that, we fight like hell." They stood together, watching the sky as the stars twinkled above, a silent reminder of how small Earth was in the vast expanse of space. But as long as they had the will to fight, Earth wasn't going down without a struggle. And as the night deepened, they both knew one thing for certain: humanity's fight for freedom had only just begun. The end of the beginning. As the days passed and the war continued to unfold, Ironclad became a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope in a world that had been cast into darkness by alien invaders. But more than that, it became a reminder of the strength of the human spirit. How, when pushed to the brink, humanity could rise up and challenge even the most powerful of enemies. And though the battle for Earth had not yet been won, the people of Ironclad knew that no matter the cost, they would never stop fighting. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.